Hey everyone, welcome back to another GRE video. Today we're going to be looking at an analyze an issue essay. So that is one of the essays that you'll be writing for the GRE writing portion. We have a prompt and the question, and then one of my students allowed me to review one of his essays for our video. And what we're going to do is break down the prompt, break down what he wrote for it, and explain where he could improve a lot and some of the things that I think that he did well that you can copy. If you're interested in me doing something like this for you, I do offer private tutoring. More information about that at the end of the video. So let's dive right in. The question here is this. Critical judgment of work in any given field has little value unless it comes from someone who is an expert in that field. Write a response in which you discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the claim. In developing and supporting your position, be sure to address the most compelling reasons and/or examples that could be used to challenge your position. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is look at the prompt here. So we're talking about critical judgment of work in any given field. So what you want to keep in mind is that we are talking about any given field. It has little value unless it comes from someone who is an expert in that field. So someone who has specific expertise, and you can define what that is on your own, or you can just give a general idea of what an accepted expert is. This prompt itself is not too complex, so there's not too much to be aware of, just the fact that you are talking specifically about experts in that field that would be familiar with that kind of work. Now, the question here is very similar to anything that you would see, and that is discussing the extent to which you agree or disagree with the statement. So anytime you write an essay, you want to show that you understand nuance. That is part of writing a good GRE essay. So here you don't want to just say, I agree or disagree. You want to say, I mostly, or I agree a little bit. And then you can explain in the rest of the paragraphs why you say that. Alright, so let's move on to the introduction here. Starting from here, it says, the author claims that critical judgment from a non-expert in any field has only very little value. I mostly disagree with this statement. The author's statement is very generalized and states that in all fields, only the expert's opinion is valuable. There has to be made a difference within the fields of work. Further, a different point of view can't harm the project and can, in some circumstances, improve the work. Still, there are some cases where the judgment of non-experts is not very valuable. So a few things that I want to point out here. Generally, the essay is not where you're going to be scoring many points. I do have a video on how to write a really good essay introduction, and that'll be in the card. But what you really want to do is shortly summarize what the prompt is, and then explain what it is that you're going to be talking about. So here I think he does that relatively well. The only problem is that there are a lot of typos. So just from what Google Drive has caught, you can see 1, 2, and 3 typos here. You can also see right here, it should be a non-expert, not an. And this is going to be a theme throughout, and it's definitely something that you need to be looking out for when you're looking at your own work. The other thing that he does here is he talks about this concession point, or the negation. So generally, when you're writing the issue essay, you want to do this. It is important to address the other side, but that's really not something that you should be talking about in your introduction, particularly because you have no place to explain yourself. You're really just saying, well, the other side has a good point. Okay, so then why is it that you are making this argument in that case. It's not a good look to address that other side in your introduction, and when we get to the paragraph that actually expands on this, I can talk a little bit more about that. Otherwise, I think the content of this introduction paragraph is relatively fine. There really is nothing else that you need to be adding or paying attention to. So let's look at the first paragraph here. First, the author's statement is generalizing that critical judgment of work has to come from an expert in any field to be valuable. There should to be made a difference between the fields of work. For example, within quant physics or other very specific topics, and the opinion on an expert is much more worth than the judgment of somebody who has no knowledge about this topic. But on the other hand, you do not have to be an expert in psychology to give somebody advices about personal concerns. Relationship tips and judgment, for example, can be very effective from a person who has not been educated within this field. People have made a lot of experience on a personal level, which might be very useful for another person who has not made some experiences yet. What you can see here is that this person is not a native English speaker, and the reason you say that is because we will say things like there should be a difference, or you should differentiate. You should differentiate between different fields of work. For example, within quantum physics, the opinion of an expert is more worthwhile or more valuable than the judgment of someone who has no knowledge on the topic. And advice, of course, is always singular. Other than that, I won't focus too much on the grammar mistakes, but what I will say is that this paragraph is extremely surface level. What he's talking about is just that there is a difference between quantum physics and relationships, and that in quant physics you would want the expert, but relationships it's totally fine. But there's really no reasoning behind that. There's no explanation about what the difference exactly is between those two topics. And being able to really identify that and explain that is incredibly important and really valuable. Right now, as it stands, this essay is around a 3. If this person is able to explain what he means and really point out the differences between quantum physics and relationships and show how that relates to whether somebody needs to be an expert, he can really pull this up to a 5, possibly a 6. So what I would say is probably right here at the end of the paragraph, because you've explained quantum physics, you've explained the relationships, which is a pretty good example. I would then talk more about what it is that is the difference between those two and why that matters. So I would say something like, most people have no experience or foundation with quantum physics, but they do have experience with different types of relationships. Generally, the more experience you have with a topic, the more reliable and nuanced your viewpoint can be. So notice how just adding these 2 sentences really expands on this point here and really allows us to understand why it is that we see a difference between quantum physics and relationships, and it helps us elaborate that onto other topics that we might see. So what the criteria is having experience with that topic, right? And having more experience means that your viewpoint is more reliable and nuanced. I might also say useful or something like that. You can play around with the wording a little bit, but what I'm trying to do with these two sentences is explain why it is that these two things are different, and then I'm talking a little bit about why that difference matters. And that really seals the deal on explaining why this generalization is so dangerous. You could even add an additional sentence here, sort of tying it all together, but considering the time crunch that you're probably under, it's not completely necessary. Let's move on to the next paragraph. So this says, furthermore, a non-expert opinion can open a different point of view that the other person maybe never thought of. Today's world is very complex, and it is important to see a problem from different perspectives. Take architecture, for instance. Of course, the judgment of fellow architecture colleagues is probably the most important one for a big infrastructure project of an individual architect. But many topics have become more complex and should be thought through from different points of view. Like for the decision of the construction of a building should also include opinions of geologists who has no clue from constructing, but knows the soil mixture and might give advices for a good place where to build this house. Okay, so as you can see, this paragraph also has quite a few grammar mistakes. The ones that Google Drive has identified, there might be 10 or something here, and that is a huge, huge problem. If you're writing your own essays, you need to be aware of this and spend some time looking over it and making sure that you're cutting these down as much as possible. Other than that, I will say that this paragraph does something of the same thing that the last paragraph did. And what I mean is that it does say a little bit about architecture and the importance of having another point of view, but I think it really can expand more on the need for that other point of view. So the only thing that it's really saying here is that other points of view kind of exist, and that complexity that he's talking about here, the complexity here and the complexity here, it really can be emphasized to make sure that the reader understands why it is that this is so important, why it is that you need to seek the opinions of other people, non-experts, even when you're dealing with something as technical as an architecture project. So what I would recommend here is 1 or 2 sentences about that complexity, about what it is that would be needed for this type of project. What I was thinking is that right here, after he talks about architecture, we can expand a little bit on what it is that an architecture project needs that fulfills what he's talking about. So what I would say here is something like, when considering building a new building, the structure, the city planning, the location, and connections to utilities such as the power grid are important to think about. So this sentence establishes that this is indeed a complex idea, a complex project. And then you could say, then you want to talk about why that complexity matters, why it is that you need a different point of view now that we know that there is complexity. And what I would say is something like, it is impossible for a single expert to know about all of these fields. So if you compare this to what I added up here, it's relatively similar in that I'm talking about why it is that this is a problem. And then I have another sentence here about why this problem is important. So when we're talking about architecture, we have to consider all of these different things that are not only related to the construction or the building of the actual building. We have to think about all of these other things, and it's impossible for just one person or a single type of expert to know about all of them. That is the real difference between having a very mediocre, average essay to something that is much more developed and much more clear about what you're arguing. We can go to the negation or the concession paragraph now. This one says, there are some circumstances where the judgment of non-experts is not very valuable. In many very specific areas, a non-expert does not know the foundations and therefore might not give valuable advices. In medicine, for example, if a patient needs a heart transplantation, the judgment of a non-doctor is not very useful. Only experts within this area can see the potential problems and set it into context. I have a lot of problems with this paragraph simply because the concession paragraph is not for you to just acknowledge that the other side is correct. That's not the function of that type of paragraph, and in fact, it really detracts from the argument that you're trying to make. And what you need to think about is that every single paragraph you write needs to contribute to your argument. And here, instead of contributing to your argument, you're actually actively working against what you're saying. And what we need to do instead is say, yes, but. And that is how you can agree that, yes, the other side has a point, but this is why my method, my ideas, my way of thinking about things is actually much more valuable. And what we could do here is just add a few ideas, just to add a sentence or two about why this perspective is still not good enough. I probably wouldn't even use this medicine example. I could leave it in there, but I would probably take it out. And then instead of just leaving it as a non-expert doesn't know the foundation and might not be able to give valuable advice, I would say, however, with most modern issues, perspectives from other people, including non-experts, brings valuable insight to the situation. So this is, as you can see, a very simple sentence, but it ties this whole paragraph back to your argument and makes it relevant. So even though there are some specific cases where you might not find anyone else's ideas helpful, most of the time, because of how complex modern issues are, having insight from a lot of different people is the best way to do it. Now, the other thing about this paragraph is that it's much shorter than all the other paragraphs. It's a few lines, whereas the other two body paragraphs are about double the length. And this is a really good ratio in general. So you want to focus on, of course, making your own argument and less on trying to hate on somebody else's. And of course, that holds true in real life as well. And with that, I will move on to the short conclusion here. And it says, in essence, there are some cases where the author's statement is true and the judgment of non-experts does not improve the project. But there has to be distinguished between the different fields of work. Many times, a different point of view improves a project. So again, I haven't been pointing this out too much, but you can see there are a few typos that do detract from being able to read the paragraph. So that needs to be addressed. But otherwise, I think it is a relatively good conclusion just because it's very simple and it briefly touches upon the 2 points that were made in the rest of the essay. You really don't have to do much more than that. Now that we've got to the very end of everything, I want to pull out a few key takeaways that we can look at from this essay. So the first one that I want to explain is bridge the gap. I don't think I used this language when I was explaining, but bridging the gap means that you need to explain the relationship between what you're trying to say and the examples that you're using and the overall argument that you're trying to make. A lot of people do what happened in this essay, which is state the example and state your argument, and then hope that the link between those two somehow magically gets bridged. But most of the time that doesn't happen, and that can really cause a lot of people to misunderstand your argument or totally miss the mark. You really want to have those 2 extra sentences or whatever else you want to add, like I put into both of those body paragraphs, so that you really explain what the link is between what you're saying, the examples that you're using, and the overall argument that you're trying to make. The second key takeaway is to really note the purpose of the concession paragraph. As I mentioned, you really need to say, yeah, but. The purpose of the concession is to advance your own argument, so always make sure that it actually does that. You just want to make sure that you reel the audience back in and you say, don't forget why my point of view is correct. The last key takeaway that I want to highlight here is that you have to pay attention to typos. This can be very difficult, especially if you're not used to typing in English or you're not a native English speaker, but even if you are, typos can really be a huge detriment. They can't help your essay at all, and in some cases, especially if you have as many as that essay had, you will probably be dropped a full point or maybe half a point on your essay just because of how many typos there are. It's a detail that you would rather probably not think about, but unfortunately you do have to pay attention to. A good rule of thumb is 1 or less per paragraph. And thanks for coming to the end of the video. I'm only able to do this because some of you like to work with a private tutor, and I am more than happy to work with you. The way that it works with me is we will talk about what your goals are and what it is that you think you need, and you can sign up for a free consultation with the link in the description or the pinned comment down below. We will talk about what it is that you want to work on, whether that's writing, verbal, and or quantitative. So mix and match of those 3 or whichever one you want to focus on most. We come up with a customized study plan and a few session agendas. During those sessions, I will give you a few sample questions. I can point you to different study resources if you're not sure what to use. We can go through content review or strategies and examples that will help you solve problems and write essays. And on top of all of that, I offer flexible payment and scheduling options as well, so you never have to worry about the logistics. I do have a sample review here of a student who was really happy to work with me, and I had a really great time working with him as well. I really hope that I am able to work with you, but if not, hope you have a great day, and good luck on the GRE. Bye!